Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sunday Night Live. It feels like not very long ago that we were here. And it probably wasn't actually, because we were here on Wednesday for Songwriting Simplified. And so it doesn't feel that long. It really doesn't. But anyway, I hope everybody is doing well. And I hope you've all had a good second half of your week. I've had a very good second half of my week. Most productive. Most excellent, really nice weather outside as well, which is no good to me because I've been in here because this is where I work. So not really been able to get out and enjoy, but it's been nice nonetheless, regardless. So hope everyone's doing good. Hang on just a minute. I think I'm having a couple of volume issues. 1 second to see if I can fix that. I'm not quite sure why the mic is a little bit quieter than normal, but it seems to be. Anyway, so let's go see who's here. If this is your first time watching Sunday Night Live, it's normally a open-ish format. How the show goes is kind of dependent upon you guys and questions that you ask. This is basically a Q&A show. We're going to be changing up the format a little bit as we get into September. I got some new ideas and some new things that we're going to be doing on the channel actually as a whole, not just with Sunday Night Live. But the show won't change that terribly much because I know you guys kind of like this. But I'm going to make it a little bit more interesting for you guys, hopefully. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be coming up kind of towards the back end of this month. Yeah, so there's plenty of new stuff coming that should be pretty exciting for you guys to get your teeth into. So if you're new here and you've never seen this show, then please do hit the subscribe button down there, I think it is, and the notification bell next to it. If you hit those two, give it 5 minutes and you'll be able to interact with the nice little community that we have built up here over the last 7 or 8 years of regular viewers in the chat, and you can ask your question if you've got a question about Studio One, Notion, or any other Personas product, especially if it's a software product, because that's more my wheelhouse. I'm not really the hardware kind of guy. Then certainly get it in there if you've got questions about mixing and mastering and music production as a broad whole. Then certainly, again, get your questions in there. We've already got a great question from Bob, which is pinned to the top of the chat. You'll see that there, which is more of a music theory question, and those are normally best asked on a Wednesday, but you know what? It's a good question, and it will certainly help out your music production quite a bit to add little bits of music theory concepts to your repertoire. Especially if you're working on your own song. So we will deal with Bob's question in just a minute. For those of you that don't know, I am from Scotland, and I am Scottish, and I know that some of my fellow countrymen are watching here, which is cool. I love it when I have fellow Scots in the chat. So if you are from Scotland, please say hello. If you are from anywhere else in the world, please again say hello. Tell us where you are in the world. I know most of my audience are in the United States, which is why we choose 6 p.m. Central Time, because most of you guys are in the United States. It kind of fits pretty well. But if you're barking mad enough to be like me in the UK and you're sat here at 10 past midnight, more power to you, because you guys are awesome for staying up that late, especially on a work night, effectively. All right, so let's go see who's here. And let's see who was here first. I can't really see because the pinned post is in the way. But let's see. Just Bob is here. I think Billy Morgan was actually first in because he usually is. And Carl Druziak is here. Papa Raptor Music is here. Lollipop Guild is here as well. Lollipop Guild is awesome, by the way, everybody. Just so you know. And it's Bob with the question, which we're going to get into in just a minute. Paul Morgan is here. Carl Druziak, I think I mentioned him already. Kevin's Guitar Stories is here. My personas, that would be my good friend Rich Cresswell is here. He has partnered with me on this channel to do the Foley Music Challenge, which I have actually extended a little bit open, mostly because I forgot. But we are keeping it open just a little bit longer, so if you've got your pieces of music using all of those sounds in the Foley workspace, then get them submitted, and you can upload them to the workspace. If you are a member of that workspace, get them submitted. And once there are a good few in there, then we will set aside a Sunday Night Live to check them out. It's going to be fun, and hopefully there will be some really, really cool pieces of music, because you guys are incredibly creative. So I'm really looking forward to the results on that. Don Oliver is also here. Alps Media, my awesome sponsor, is here. Let's see. Andrew Lamb is here. Who else is here? Keith Chadwick over in Canada is here. Kingston Dread is here from Jamaica. I know he's in Jamaica because he has been around for a good wee while on this channel. And as I said, Billy Morgan is here as well. Billy's cool. Billy is great. Andrew Lamb has another music theory question, which is fine. We'll get to that as well. Just Bob says, I'm a Lord Honorary for buying a small piece of land to conserve and not allow building. Awesome. Yes, I am too. But not necessarily just an honorary one. Lollipop Girl says, you're too sweet. Maybe a pinch to prove otherwise. You know, I like talking my friends up, because my friends make me happy, and so I want to make sure that the world knows that my friends make me happy and talk about them. So that's just kind of who I am, really. So, you know, if my friends do awesome things and are incredibly creative, then I want to celebrate that and make sure that people know about what they can do. All right, let's get to Bob's question. And then we'll get to Andrew's question. And that should give you guys time to get your questions into the chat. And we will see where this goes. It seems like the theme for tonight is a little bit music theory, which is more kind of a songwriting simplified thing. But, you know, I'll take those questions just now, for sure, because otherwise it'll be a very short show. So, Bob says, how do you write music only using the Lydian scale, for example? What chords can you introduce that accompany the Lydian scale but are not actually part of that scale? It's a good question, because the broad concept there is modal music. Modal music is very, very cool. You can be as restrictive or as open as you want. The cool thing about modal music is that you are deriving everything from just a scale, or, you know, maybe two scales. Maybe your piece has several different modes that are in several different sections of your piece or your song. The cool thing about modal music is that it's broad, it's wide open. You can improvise without really having to think about chord changes, because any note from the mode is going to fit. And you can use passing notes, you can use passing chords that don't belong to that mode, don't belong to that scale, and they will sound just as good. In fact, they will provide tension and release. So you're going from outside of the scale to create that tension, and then you're coming back to create the release. And you can do this with major minor music as well, not just modal music, but it works particularly effectively in modal music, which is why a lot of great jazz musicians who have been involved in modal music, like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, just to name two, but there are plenty of others, and particularly John Coltrane would go outside of the scale quite a lot, and in some points he would go into a completely different key that nobody else is playing in to create all sorts of tensions and dissonances. And then the skill then is to come right back, so that you don't create so much tension that it becomes too abstract. Because when it becomes too abstract, then the listener can't comprehend it. The listener can't engage with it because it's too removed from the context of the rest of the work. Which is why, I mean, there is some really, really good abstract work, and there is some that kind of like you look at it and go, what is that? Like, at one of the art galleries here in Edinburgh, when there was an arts festival, there was an empty kind of room. And in that room, exactly in the center of the floor, was a pencil. And that was it. That was the piece of art. And a lot of people went, you know what? What the heck does that mean? What does that mean? What does it mean to have a pencil in the center of the floor? So most people were just like very dismissive of it, and they just didn't understand it. And then there are some people that were, there were art critics who would stand there and they would talk about this pencil in the center of the room for hours. They would write newspaper articles on it, or art magazine critical pieces on it. And so context is king. Context is always king. And that's what helps us to understand how things work. And this is true when you have modes as when you're just working in regular major minor tonality. So the Lydian mode, for those of you that don't know what that is basically the C major scale, which is all the white notes from C to C. But we don't start it on C, we start it on F. Okay? And that gives you that kind of strange interval there. So it's kind of like an F major scale, but it's got a sharpened fourth in it. Because the F major scale should do this. That's what it should do, because that's what the C major scale does. But the Lydian scale doesn't do that. The Lydian scale raises that fourth interval by a semitone. And that's what gives the Lydian scale its distinctive character. It's a little bit whimsical. It's a little bit wistful in its kind of character. And so it gets used quite a bit in film music when they're trying to get a sense of kind of mystery, or they're trying to evoke a sense of mystery, or a sense of, maybe there's a disconnect between in reality in the scene. You can use the Lydian mode to do this, and you can do this very effectively because of that raised fourth. So it sounds a little bit it's like a major scale, but it's kind of slightly leaning one way or the other, either to the left or to the right, depending upon your perspective on life. But certainly I think this is, to me, is leaning to the left. But, whichever way you think it kind of leans, to me, the Lydian scale is like a major scale that slightly leans. And that's pretty cool, because it's not regular, but it's not irregular. It doesn't terrify you if you've never heard modal music before. So, to answer the question, there's lots of chords you can derive from this scale. You can pick a few notes and you can play them, and you can play the voicings as open or as closed as you like. So what's open? Open would be kind of like, stacks of fourths. So those kind of stacks of fourth, you'd hear that a lot in the music of Coltrane from maybe 1960, 61, for example, up to maybe about 1962, and you'd hear that in his piano player at the time, which was the very, very, very great, now sadly departed McCoy Tyner, and you would hear him do these kind of voicings quite a bit with his left hand whilst he's improvising on the scale. So stacks of fourths are really great because they are open. They don't really sound major. They don't really sound minor. So stacks of fourths work great. Is there a chord symbol for such a thing? There's lots of ways in which musicologists have tried to create chord symbols, like you do for a major chord or a minor chord. Everyone knows what is, those kind of chord symbols. But for a stack of fourths, usually you would state the root note of the fourth, the stack. So A, D, G. You'd call that an A, but then you put a Q next to it, a small Q raised slightly above it. And that means quartal. So you're talking fourths. And you can move these around and they'll sound pretty good. So those are the kind of things you can do if you want to open up the voicings. But if you want to kind of stay fairly traditional and whilst, you know, moving within that Lydian mode, you can take a regular like F major. Let's get this mic over a little bit more. You can take a regular F major chord. And you can put a G, you know, move that up to a G chord. Fit. But if you want to go out a little bit, you can certainly do that as well. So, you know, you can go. So you can do things like that. So basically what I'm doing there is over this F kind of chord I'm suggesting with the F and the C in the bass, I've got an E major triad here. That provides a lot of tension, probably very, very, very large amounts of tension, which I then resolve here. And then I was going up a little bit here to this A flat triad. Again, that's providing tension, which I then resolve. And those don't belong to the Lydian mode at all, but they provide tension, and you've always got that grounding that you're always going to come back. So you can go anywhere you like and still come back. And they will still sound like they fit, because the ear is being perturbed. The ear is being bent to the shape that you want it to be bent to, but you've got to bring the listener back. Otherwise, you know, that's kind of like leaving a sentence unfinished, hanging in the air. And that's how our brains work. That's how our minds are constructed. They are constructed to understand tension, release, tension, release, tension, release. And what happens is if you have a buildup of too much tension with no release, the equilibrium becomes unstable. And, we lose our ability to critically think, and all sorts of other things start happening. But that's getting a little bit too metaphysical and psychological. But I hope that kind of answers that. Chords that shouldn't fit but somehow do. So I hope that answers that, because that's a great question. All right, let's go and find Andrew's question. He says, a composition harmonic. I am writing a piece of music in G major, and at one point the tune modulates up a minor third to B flat. Why does this work so well? Great question. Why does changing key by an interval of a third, either major or minor, why does that sound so good? There's a lot of reasons for that. Now, they're not related keys. Here's G major. And there's B flat. They're not really related. But they sound great. chord changes that move by thirds sound great. They just do. They just sound really, really great. And you know, they're not necessarily related to each other. Not directly in the sense of going round the circle of fifths related. But here's the thing. And Leonard Bernstein, in a series of lectures that he did in 1973, made this particular point about the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths isn't really a circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is actually, if you think about it, it's the entire 12-tone chromatic scale that we have in the equal tempered system. Now, how do we arrive at this conclusion? Well, you know, if you stack up fifths going up this way, and then you come down the piano going downwards in the same interval, you end up effectively covering all 12 tones. So, you know, the circle of fifths is really the chromatic scale, just interpreted differently, interpreted relationally rather than abstractly. So this is why every key center is in fact related, and you can draw lines to prove this. So if you were to take that circle of fifths, and then if you were to draw a straight line between G and B flat, and then go round in thirds until you get back to G, and then pick another note, another key center, and do the same, go round in thirds, you will find that you'll have this really fascinating interlinked shape. And you'll see how all key centers, however remotely distant they are from each other, are all related in one way or another. Now, the cool thing that makes G and B flat sound so good is you have a common tone. Let's take a look at that G chord. G, B, and D. Where's the common tone, you're asking? It's the D. So it's that common tone that helps link those two chords together. Now, if you're thinking about key centers, so you're in G for one section, then you're in B flat in another section, you can use that D as your binder, so to speak. You know, if you've got two bricks, then, you know, a G brick and a B flat brick, that D is the mortar that holds those two things together and makes those two things work. So, as with going from one key to any other key, look for common tones. So, you know, G to B flat has a D common tone there. Going from B flat to D flat, F is the common tone. So this is why going round in thirds works really nicely, because there's always one common tone. And it's usually the fifth of the first chord becomes the third of the second chord. All right, so the fifth of G becomes the third of B flat. And if I keep going round, the third of D, the fifth of B flat becomes the third of D flat. And you can keep going round. So that common tone has, you know, the same note is common between the two chords. It just functions differently. And that's what binds those two key centers together. And this is why you can do things like tritonal substitutions and other chord substitutions. Tritonal substitutions are not the only ones. There are others. There's thirds related substitutions, which was what we're kind of beginning to get into a little bit, where you can substitute one chord for another that is only a third, a major third, or a minor third away, and instead of the tritone, and it works. It's less effective than the tritone because a tritone has two common tones, but you know, this minor third related substitution has one common tone. So it is enough just to be able to make it work. But that's one of the reasons. There are several, but that is one reason why it sounds so good when you're going from G to B flat to D flat, and so on round by an interval of a minor third. Try it with major thirds and see what you think. Kind of has a different kind of sound to it, doesn't it? The cool thing about doing it by major thirds is there's not very far you can go. G to B, B to E flat or D sharp. And then if you're going to go by major third, you're back to G again. So there's only so far you can go. Whereas minor thirds, there's a whole circuit that you can do. And that's kind of the difference. And they sound less related. There's no common tones. Actually, there is one common tone. The third of the G becomes the root of the next chord. But then the root of this chord, which is B, the third of this chord, which is B, which is the D sharp, becomes the root of the next one. And so, you know, there is that kind of common tone. So though they kind of work, but it's kind of effective in a different way. Good question. Let's see. Oh yes, don't forget, folks, that it is Labor Day in the United States tomorrow. So if you have a technical support ticket in at PreSonus, it will take a little bit longer getting a reply to you because the US office will be closed, so all US tech support agents and sales agents will be not available. It will be Europe only. So that means I'll be working. The US office will be on the beach in September. I know, highly unlikely, but you never know. Different parts of the United States might actually have beach weather in September. I don't know. But certainly I will be working. So it is entirely possible that I, on my own, will be tech support for the day. So we'll kind of see how that goes. But yes, it may take a little bit longer getting a reply to you back. So please be patient with tech support and sales. If you've got sales questions, if you've got issues with PreSonus Sphere and credit cards and renewals and that kind of thing, and you've got a ticket in with sales, please be patient with them, because they are a little short-handed right now, as well as the fact that Labor Day is coming up as well. So it may take them a wee bit longer to get to you. Please do not create a new support ticket to try and get their attention, because all you'll do is just bury your own ticket. So please don't do that. Whether you've got a sales ticket or a tech support ticket. Multiple tickets don't really do anything other than just clutter up the system and take us longer to get to you. So yeah, thank you for reminding me about Labor Day there. Let's see. Just Bob says, but the abstract never sounds like a bad note. It doesn't quite fit, but no wrong note sound. It seems so forgiving for being so precise. And that's because your ear is being perturbed. Because so long as you always resolve that tension, it will work. Doesn't matter how spicy that tension is, it will work. It's like, you know, some people have a taste for incredibly spicy food that is incredibly hot, but they love it. And for some people, that would just, you know, it would make them vomit, and it would make them, you know, need hospital or other medical assistance. And so it depends upon your tolerance for that for musical tension. If you've got a high threshold for musical tension, then you will be fine listening to a Schoenberg violin concerto or something by Scriabin or Berlioz or Webern or Berg or something like that. You'll love that stuff. You'll dig it. You'll dig that kind of atonal 12-tone note row stuff, which is all just unresolved tension. That's what it is. But on the other hand, you might not have that kind of threshold for it, and really you're much happier listening to something like early Mozart or Handel, or maybe a little bit of early Beethoven. Or, if you're not into classical music, then you'd be listening to very straightforward pop music with, maybe a bit of blues, a bit of rock music, but not really anything that's particularly harmonically advanced. And that's okay. Everybody's got their different taste buds. For me personally, I'm just as happy at the extremely tense, dissonant, spicy end of things where no note is related to any other, and I just punched my keyboard and that hurt. I am just as at home with that kind of music as I am with, down home Mississippi Delta blues. I'd happily sit for hours listening to that stuff as I would extremely dissonant and chromatic freeform jazz, and everything in between. That's me. I have quite a broad palette, but it depends on what you're into. Roy Nicolason is here. Hello, Roy. He says, I never understood how to get rid of the unused bars at the end of a project after the tune is finished. How do you do that in Studio One 5? You don't. In a nutshell, you don't. It's not an issue, and I'll tell you why it's not an issue. Let's go over to Studio One so we can see why it is not an issue. Because we have, in this little global track visibility box here, we have something called the marker track. Now, in the marker track, if I zoom, you'll find that there is a start marker, and by default, there's an end marker. And it's by default set to 5 minutes at the tempo of your song. So in this case, it defaults to 100 BPM. Yours might default to 120, in which case your end marker is going to be in a different point than mine. So when you get to the end of your song, this end marker means that when you render your song and you set it to render between start and end, it will only render between the start and the end markers. So if you set the end marker for the end of your song, it will never render past that. But if you were to set Studio One here, let's say, which is just like 8 seconds before we get to that point, and if I just hit play, and you can see it is very slowly moving, but if I was to leave this for 6 or 7 hours, we would get to bar 7,920 something, probably. It would just keep going. But here's the interesting thing. It doesn't actually matter. And you can't really get rid of this. And the reason why you can't get rid of this is because the timeline is essentially never ending. It is fundamentally never ending. It will keep going. Now, it's gone out of view because I've turned off auto scroll. But as you can see, it is still going. Now, if I was to change the time base here to seconds, you can see it's still going. And I'm trying to zoom. But, it will keep going. If I was just to leave this now indefinitely and come back tomorrow morning, who knows what bar number we'd be up to. I have to be honest, I've never tested it. I probably should test it and just leave Studio One to see how long it would just play for. Will it just play indefinitely? Will I, be able to go away for a week and sun myself on the beach? Not going to happen in Scotland, but you get the idea. Sun myself on the beach, maybe down in Jamaica with Kingston Dread, and then come back, and will Studio One still be playing? Maybe. I don't even know if it will just eventually go, okay, nothing is doing here. There is no sound. I may as well just stop. Some DAWs will do that. They will have an automatic cutoff point where they'll go, there's nothing doing. I'm just going to stop. And it will just stop. But other DAWs, there are some, I'm not going to name them, but there are some DAWs where as soon as you get to this end marker, it will automatically stop. Studio One doesn't automatically do that. What you need to do is you need to add a marker. Let's say we want one here. I need to press Y to add another marker. Let's just put one here. Okay. And then I'm going to move this one to here. And then what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to right click it and see we have this option here that says stop at marker. And then what I can do is I can rename this stop. And then what can happen here is let's set the playhead just a bit further back and let's watch what happens. Take a few seconds to get there, but watch what happens. And it stopped. It obeyed our command and it stopped at the stop marker, and it will not continue playing after this point. But these bars, this empty space here is always here. It's because the timeline in Studio One is effectively infinite. It's indefinite. And there's a good reason for that. And that is because of a certain feature that is up here called scratch pads. Now, if you've never heard of scratch pads, what they are is it's just a safe place where you can go and sketch out ideas, or if you let's say you have a collection of takes from a guitar solo, for example. Let's say you've had a guitar player in and you've had him do 25 takes. And you're thinking, you know what? I really like take number 2, and that's probably the one we're going to use, but I want to keep all of these ones just in case I decide later that the phrase from take 5 at bar 27 is better than the one that he played in take 2. And that's cool because I can just go and grab that. And I don't have to have it cluttering up my main arrangement. And so that's what a scratch pad is for. You can also do things like radio edits. So you can do a vocalless version. You can just literally copy and paste everything into a scratch pad and drop out the vocal. Keep the vocal in your main arrangement, take it out for the scratch pad. You can save that scratch pad, and then you can send, let's say you want to use it for a backing track. You've got that as a backing track. Or if you want to do a radio edit and say, okay, we're going to lose the little interlude between each verse, you can cut out that interlude, but keep it in your main arrangement and just adjust it in the scratch pad. And then you just do a bounce of the scratch pad version, and that's your radio edit to keep it down to like 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So that's what the scratch pads are for. But the cool thing is the scratch pads, they are all down there. They are all at the end of the song. That's where they live. There is only one timeline. So if you've got like 10 or 11 scratch pads, that's where all that information is being stored. It's being stored at the end of the song. And that's a little secret that the developers kind of hinted at when scratch pads were developed for Studio One 3 in 2015. And they kind of hinted at that. But that's where they are. They are all at the end of the timeline because there is only one timeline, and the scratch pad is just a convenient way of being able to put things way out the way and also be able to bring them back if you need to. So that's why the timeline in Studio One is infinite. So I hope that answers that question. That's a good question, though. Good one. I like that question. Right click on the end marker and select stop on end. Yeah, there is no stop on end. Let me show you. There's the end marker. If I right click it, it just says create sections from markers. There is no stop at end. So I'm not sure what you're seeing, Kevin. But yeah, there is no stop on end in the right click menu for the end marker. You've just got create a range of sections from markers, cut, copy, and delete. That's all you've got. But if you create a marker, you've got a stop at marker option, and you can check that box. So I'm not quite sure what you're seeing for you there. Cleon says, I have left Studio One playing whilst I was out for hours and it was still going when I came back. Yes, yeah, that's cool. So there you go. There's somebody that has tested the theory. Bob says, can you do a show on creating harmonies off of one vocal where you copy vocals and use the semitone feature of each channel? I can certainly do that. We could maybe do that for a Songwriting Simplified, maybe to demonstrate a quick, easy way to make harmonies. It's actually really easy to do it that way, but you have to know a little bit about music theory to make it work. Because if you're just going to pitch shift things up and down a semitone, then the thing you have to be aware of is the intervallic relationship between one and the other. So let's say, you know, if I was to take a melody that starts here and goes, and I decide I'm going to start that same thing, but on D flat, you know, that sounds all right, doesn't it? But if I was to decide I'm going to start that on C, you know, might sound a little wonky. Or if I was going to start that on a B, and the thing is, you don't get the option if you're just like minusing by semitones or plussing by semitones. You need to know exactly how many semitones it is between intervals, otherwise it'll start sounding weird. So if you accidentally went here, you know, you might not want a tritone as your interval. So knowing kind of how intervals work and how many semitones there are between one note and another note is going to help you get quickly to what you want rather than having to do it by trial and error. Trial and error works fine and will teach you what intervals sound like, because you'll get to hear what one interval sounds like against another. But really, it's a very time-consuming way to go about things. So learn how many semitones there are between an F and a D, for example. You know, 1, 2, 3, for example. That's -3 interval. Okay, so bear those kind of things in mind. Kevin says, my bad, I left out the part about creating the market. Yeah, there you go. Alright, so Secret Squirrel is out here. Cheers, Secret Squirrel. Thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed the show. So we got 10 minutes left, guys. And I'm happy to take another question. I'm going to rock up the chat and make sure I have not missed anything. And I don't think I have. But always good to check. Let's see. I'm not really seeing any other questions, but Bob says that would be cool. Yeah, and we can certainly demonstrate that. I can just sing like a phrase into the mic, and then we can kind of layer from there. That'd be quite interesting. For sure. So any other questions, folks? Because we got like 10 minutes left of the show. And so far, we've had some really good ones. But Bob, yeah, please drop me an email to remind me that that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to demonstrate on the next show. So that I don't forget, because I could easily forget. And I don't like kind of forgetting things that you guys are interested in. So yeah, please do that. And I said do. I'm just checking something. All right, there we go. All right, cool. So we have, as I say, we've got 10 minutes left. I would like to fill this 10 minutes with another couple of questions. But if there are no questions, then we will just end the show a little bit early, which would be a little bit annoying because we kind of started a little bit late because I was trying to get my lights working and they decided that they weren't going to work. So I was messing about with those right at the start of the show before I could even get started. So that would be why there was a wee bit of a delay. Keith Chadwick says, wait! Hurry up, Keith. Get typing. Type faster. I have a question. Give me a minute to write it out. Okay, cool. No problem. We can do that. We can wait. I'm quite happy to drum on my mixer. Whilst we wait. Rich says, what do you think of how new musical artists doing wholly instrumental music is having a positive effect on writing as a whole? That's a broad question. I think writing instrumental music is a very cool thing to do. I'm very in favor of instrumental music. Yeah. Does that help answer your question? I think writing instrumental music is very important, and the reason why I think it's very important is because it helps you develop good arranging skills, and it helps you develop good melody writing. Because when you're writing for a vocal and you're writing for a vocalist, you are kind of limited by what their range is and kind of what intervals they are comfortable singing. But if you are writing for some other instrument like a flute or a clarinet or a saxophone or a trumpet or a trombone or something like that, you're only limited by the range of that instrument and the capability of the person that you are going to be having perform for you on that instrument. So there are fewer limitations than if you are writing a vocal. So you can be much more daring. You can be, certainly to do with intervallic leaps, you can be quite daring. You can write stuff like that just sounds a little bit weird and wonky. But the thing you have to bear in mind is how easy is it to play that little phrase, those intervals on, say, a clarinet or a saxophone. It might be cumbersome. It might be difficult to go from a C to a D flat, the octave above, and then down to a G. That might be awkward fingering. And that's where working with other instrumentalists who know their instruments and they know kind of what is easy to get their fingers around is going to help you, because they might find another way to finger that particular note or that particular phrase. So it does have a positive effect because you get to learn how other instrumentalists work. You get to learn how other instruments work. So I would always say, if you have never written instrumental music just strictly for instruments, no vocals, if you've never done it before, then I would recommend you do it, that you give it a go. And I would say the first thing that you should do is learn, once you've decided what your instrumentation is, learn how those instruments work, at least get a bare bones basic working knowledge. What's the written range of the instrument? You've got to bear in mind, if it's a wind instrument, the musician has to be able to breathe. So don't forget to leave them space to breathe when you're writing your melodies. And if it's a string instrument like a violin or a viola or a cello, then you got to think about, can this player reach that interval physically with their hands? Or is it going to be too wide a leap, or is there a cross stringing that's just not going to work? And then, of course, you have to bear in mind, a bowing technique. Do we want to start with a down bow, or are we going to start with an up bow? And if so, why? And then the other thing you have to consider is, how long you're going to make your musician draw the bow across the string for. Because if it's a really slow, really long amount of time, the hand is going to make small, minute changes of pressure upon the bow and upon the string, and you might get some interesting overtones or some inconsistencies of tone color. Things like that. So those are things that you would be wise to kind of learn. And you can learn that by talking to the instrumentalists that you're working with. They will help you shape your melody. They will say, that's definitely not possible, or that is very definitely possible, but it would be easier if you wrote it this way round. Or that kind of phrase length is definitely easy. No, that phrase length is too long. You'll need to put some space in here so that I can breathe. Unless, of course, they can circular breathe. And not many people can do that. But I think, with all of those limitations, it will have a positive impact upon your ability to write music, because you will learn how other instruments work, how they're played, what are their limitations, what are their requirements, and also what instruments go well together. You might find that a flute played at the same time as an alto saxophone might not work, because the alto saxophone is considerably louder than the flute and will overwhelm it. So how do you solve that problem? Well, you get them playing at different times, not necessarily playing together, or you have the flute playing very high above the alto sax so that it cuts through a bit more. So you learn stuff like that. All right, so let's see. Keith says, when I play a standard C chord, C, E, G, then do the different forms that say the top G drops to the lower. At this point, it can be read as a different chord based on the bass. You're talking about chord inversions. So if I play C, E, G, and we drop the G down an octave, it's still a C major chord. Unless this down the bottom changes. But for all intents and purposes, this is still a C major chord. It's just a second inversion. What's an inversion for those of you who don't know? Well, with a triad, you've got 3 notes. So you've got different permutations in which those 3 notes will work. C, E, and G. That's root position, because the C, the root that defines the chord, is the lowest note. The next one is with the 3rd at the bottom. That's first inversion. And then the next one is second inversion with the 5th at the bottom. And then you're back to root position again, just up the octave. But they are all a C major chord. Now, if I were to change the bass note and put it in position here, that is still a C major chord. It's not become magically an E minor chord. Even if I change the inversion to first inversion with my right hand, it becomes C with the 3rd in the bass, which is going to resolve to there. Okay, so yes, the bass note will help define kind of what a certain chord is and is not, but for the most part it's that intervallic relationship and the inversion. The more notes you have in a chord, the more inversions you can have. So a 5-note chord is going to have definitely more than 3 inversions. All right, so those are things to be thinking about when you're thinking about chords and chord voicings and how that works. And I could be completely wrong about that as well, because, no formal training. Yeah, it's really, don't worry about the lack of formal training. I have no formal piano training. I did not take a single lesson on this thing at all. I learned from listening to records. I learned from listening to my mother's Thelonious Monk records, Bud Powell, Keith Jarrett. I love Keith Jarrett's piano playing, and Chick Corea. Those are and McCoy Tyner. Those are the 5 piano players that have most influenced me and got me listening. And then, if I want to listen to a piano player that's going to totally intimidate me, then I would want to listen to somebody like Fats Waller or Art Tatum. Art Tatum could play at 420 beats per minute, which is, if he's playing 16th notes, he's getting close to 1,000 notes a minute, if not more, in his right hand, whilst maintaining a stride pattern. What's a stride pattern? Well, a stride pattern is where you're playing. That's a stride kind of thing. And he'd be doing bass note, chord, bass note, chord, bass note, chord, and then improvising a melody over the top at close to 1,000 notes per minute. Truly breathtaking and totally intimidating that somebody could play like that. So I have no formal training either, Keith. So you and I, we're in the same boat here. The encouragement for you is that you can learn this stuff by sitting down at the piano and working it out and referencing, recordings where you hear some of these things being used, and then you just try them out. You listen to what you hear and you try and pick those notes out on the piano, and that improves your pitch. And it improves your critical listening and critical thinking about how music works. And before you know it, you'll be teaching me advanced piano harmony. Trust me, because that's how it works. All right, so Just Bob says, email sent. Thank you. Looking forward on how to add semitone to my tool belt. We'll watch after the show since I'll be at work. No problem, Bob. Absolutely. Billy Morgan is going to launch his after show Zoom in about 15 minutes. So if you are up for that, then please do go and check out the link to the show that Billy has added. John Hawk is here. He says, I came in 10 minutes to go. No problem, John. Please do check out the replay because there are some very, very cool questions in this week's show that you should definitely check out. And you even say, yeah, McCoy Tyner is the man. McCoy Tyner was a legend. What a wonderful piano player. And I learned so much from certainly his work with the Coltrane Quartet and the way he voiced chords, particularly when improvising. There are some points where his right hand is going so fast that the left hand doesn't really know what to do, but he still ends up playing something that sounds really, really great. And he has absolutely massive hands, or at least he did have absolutely massive hands. I've got fairly big hands. I can stretch like an 11th in my right hand and an 11th in my left hand because they're roughly the same size. But I mean, he had really big hands. And really, really amazing technique. Paul Morgan says, thanks for another very informative show. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. Please do keep those questions coming. And if you find after this show that you've got a question that you didn't ask in the show, that's fine. Drop me an email. Go to the website at the bottom of the screen there, www.jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk. Go there. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and there's a contact form there. Fill that contact form out and get your question to me, and I will review the question and I'll try and get it into one of these Sunday night or Wednesday night shows, depending upon the question that it is that you have. And I'm really looking to get email questions for you guys. So please, if you don't want to put them in the chat, certainly send me an email, because I mean, the chat, you're only limited to like 200 characters. Which is not really a lot for some of these questions. So if you're finding that you're constrained by those, drop me an email where you can give me a lot more detail, a lot more information. And then we can make a big deal out of your question on one of these shows. All right, folks. And with that, I will bid you all a very good night, and I will see you on Wednesday for Songwriting Simplified. Stay tuned, folks. Lots more stuff coming. Cheers for now.